Brahmagupta. So the dispute was between mythology and rationality, basically Puranic knowledge and the rational knowledge which Aryabhatta and Brahmagupta was studying. But that story, mythological stories about eclipse, Rahu Ketu, and all sort of disputes were there. Irrespective of that, Brahmagupta moved towards the shadow theory while believing in the Rahu Ketu story as well. But recently, in the current present generation discussion, I have heard about a belief that mythological stories are metaphorical way of passing down knowledge and wisdom across generations. Though we have lost the translation, the meaning of that. Is there any truth in this belief that the Puranic knowledge is non is rationally but metaphorically?
So coming first to the last point, you see, after all, how do we understand science? You read a paper or you read a book. So it's in ordinary language. And ordinary language meaning extraction is not 100% unique. Each sentence depends on the previous sentence or the previous sentence or even the geometrical construct in the phraseological construction. So there are huge linguistic theories of how do we understand text. In that, metaphor plays a very important role. In India, we have a very detailed study of this called there is a Lakshana, there is Vyanjana, there is Abhidha. So this is a very detailed. They have of course used it mostly in trying to understand poetry. This discussion arose in, so we can have poet's imagination can be explained in 10 different ways and how does it convey. But then it came in the domain of darshanas also. Both Nyaya and Mimamsa have this understanding that what is called Shabda Bodha. How do we understand words, sentences, passages? So there is a huge discussion in India. There is a lot of discussion in modern West also. And metaphor is a very important. So the word force, this would have been in common use earlier. That has acquires a physics connotation. The word work has a very different connotation in common. All of you might have known that if you are carrying a load and standing there, you are doing no work because you are not moving that. So like that, so the physics connotation of work is force times force dot product with displacement. So like that it's there. So metaphor is a very important part of communication. Only if communication is so symbolic and so this thing that even then how symbols have to be given meaning has to be separately discussed and all that. So it's not the fact that then you have to, there were two approaches to correcting this. One was to improve the language. So what Nayayikas did in 16th, 17th, 18th century, even from 14th century, was to discover a language which could exactly convey what you are understanding. And so that is a very profound way of doing things in Navya Nyaya. And the various, what was done in mathematical logic in 18th, 19th century by means of what is called quantification and new methods of logic. A different way was done in the Nyaya philosophy in trying to do the same thing. So one is to refine the language. So that is done in India in extraordinary amount of ways. Now the issue between Puranas and the Jyotish Shastra. Puranas are not text of Jyotish Shastra. So the Jyotish Shastra books themselves say what is discussed in Purana is not our concern. Or they will say if you try to understand this in this way, it will be a misconception. They are not going to say the Puranas are false or wrong or they are, what is it, they are ways of fooling people or they don't even say mythology. They say that they will have their own meaning in the, you have to talk to Puranikas about them. But in this science of astronomy, this conception that moon is above the sun, which is some Purana is saying or some other philosophical text might be saying, this is not in our model, this is not the correct thing. So that is one way of understanding. The other is Puranas are supposed to be, I mean, the most of the, you have this 18, 19, 20, Ashtadasha Mahapuranas, even that list, various Puranas come in, come out. So about 22, 23 major Puranas are there. And then there are various Upa Puranas. Then there are other Jati Puranas, Sthala Puranas and things like that. So these major Puranas also, they are supposed to be the interpreters of the Vedic corpus. So, Itihasa Puranabhyam Vedam Samupa Brahmayet. Vedas are difficult to understand, and to get a good understanding of the Vedas, you have to study the Itihasa, which means Ramayana and Mahabharata, and the Puranas. And this one can check in various things. For instance, in one of the recent understanding of the observational content of Vedas, the Vedic corpus has lot of observational information as concerning astronomy also. Detailed discussion of the motion of the sun, solstices, equinox, all sorts of things are there. One very nice thing was found, that the word Dhruva occurs about 50-60 times in Veda. And then there is a text called Taittiriya Aranyaka. Vedas, as you know, Samhita, then Brahmana, then Aranyaka. So in the Taittiriya Shaka of the Krishna Yajurveda, there is an Aranyaka, and there is a detailed description of a constellation called Shishumara and the discussion of the 14 stars there. And in the end it says this is Dhruva, around whom the entire solar system moves and all that. So the same thing appears in Brahmanda Purana with great. And this Dhruva, this Shishumara constellation is seeable today in the sky also. It's called Dragon. And this star Dhruva is Alpha Draconis, and it happened to be at the point where the Earth's axis met the sky about 5,000 years ago, not today. Today it's about 30 degrees away. So, what is in Taittiriya Aranyaka is there in Brahmanda Purana. Like this, one can see many correspondences. And even in Indian astronomy, there is an older first model of sky that you see, that everything goes around in a circle around some point. And that point, you trace it to where the Earth's axis meets the sky. And if there is a star there, you call that star as the pole star. Otherwise, there is a north celestial pole. So this north celestial pole is talking about from ancient times. So this was the first approximation to celestial motion. So this is the first model of celestial motion that is there in the Vedas. Then there are more important changes and all those things happen. So the Puranas discuss not something all at the same time. They are talking about what is said in Veda, then they may talk about what is said in a later period, then they talk about what is said in a later period. So they are giving a popular summary of what is contained in older books. And they are always accretion. There is no Purana, therefore it's called a Purana Samhita. You keep adding to it. So the way to understand Purana is always actually in that sense more by understanding how that text has evolved and things like that, by a more textual analysis rather than as a model. So in some section of the Purana there may be one model, at another section there can be another model. So only when the foreign rule came in India, Indians were put under great stress because people said, what are your books? They are saying this nonsense. So Alberuni is writing in his book that he wrote in 1030 or whatever, which is called Indica. But the book is The Beliefs of the Hindus, What is Reasonable and Unreasonable About Them. That's the title of the book. So he says these people are talking of some star in Sismar, some other constellation as Dhruva and all that. Because he doesn't know this is the older Dhruva that is contained in the Vedic book, which continued to be Dhruva till about 2000 BCE. Afterwards, the astronomers stopped talking about that as Dhruva. And they were not talking about a Dhruva Tara at all. So all our astronomical books are Aryabhatiya, Brahmasputra Siddhanta, Lalla, Shishyadhivritta. So all texts, even up to Bhaskaracharya, were not talking of a Dhruva Tara, a pole star. Around 11th, 12th century, another star started coming close to the Earth's axis, because the Earth's axis does move like a top. It's called precession amongst the stars. It's a very slow motion, once in 26,000 years. And this was what was there. And so now currently you have a star very close to, within about half a degree of the north celestial pole. It's called the Alpha Ursa Minoris. That is today's Dhruvatara. And this Ursa Minoris was called Dhruva Matsya in Bhaskaracharya's Siddhanta Shiromani. Later on in 16th century, Kamalakara Bhatta actually is trying to say this is actually very close to Dhruvatara. Today, in 2100, it will be almost half a minute or something from the North Celestial Pole. Then it will. So, the issue is things keep changing, and in the Purana texts are not at one time. All popular texts will have various things, but a systematic treatise which is talking of observation and theory will not be doing this. They will be doing it, a model that will be reasonably true for their time when that book is written. Now, between Aryabhatta and Brahmagupta, Aryabhatta does not say that the idea of Rahu and Ketu is nonsense, though Narasimha seems to imply that in this. Aryabhatta is saying that the solar eclipse occurs due to the shadow of the earth, shadow of the moon, and the lunar eclipse occurs due to the shadow of the earth. So this is just one single half verse or one verse. Shashanam Chadayati Bhutchaya, something like that. So this is all that he says. And the commentators then explain. Now this Rahu and Ketu have an extraordinary history. So the Vedic corpus does talk of a Rahu, and they talk of some eclipse also. But Ketu in the entire Vedic corpus has nothing to do with eclipse. It is what we call as comet. Even in Hindi, the word Dhumaketu is used for comets. So there are hundreds of comets which are discussed and described in the Vedic corpus. People have analyzed them. And even later texts, after 1500 BCE, 1000 BCE, texts talk of Ketu is that only. Even at the time of Varahamihira in 550 of Common Era, Ketu did not mean what it means today in our popular astrology. Popular astrology, Ketu is understood as there are two nodes of the moon. The moon's orbit is inclined to the orbit in which Earth goes around the sun. The orbit in which Earth goes around the sun, or sun goes around the Earth as seen from the Earth. So that orbit is amongst the stars. So that orbit, that plane is called ecliptic. Now the moon's, this thing is inclined by about 4 degrees to the ecliptic. So there will be 2 points at which the moon's orbit will cross the plane of the ecliptic. Those are the 2 nodes. Eclipses have a main bearing, these 2 nodes have a main bearing on eclipse. Because you will not have a lunar eclipse on every full moon day, nor will you have a solar eclipse on every new moon day. So only when the moon is close to the node also, what is the deviation of the moon from the ecliptic, if it is more, moon will not be obstructing the sun to get you the solar eclipse, or earth will not be obstructing the moon, the earth's shadow, to give you lunar eclipse. So the moon's latitude should be very small. Latitude is the deviation from the ecliptic plane. It should be very small, and it should be close to the node. So only when moon is close to the node, this will happen. So these nodes are called Rahu and Ketu. Ascending node is called Rahu, descending node is called Ketu. So this idea, I think, starts in India around 5th, 6th, 7th century. So this Navagraha, etc. is there. There are some older books. Graha can mean anything that does grahana, anything that sort of obstructs the vision of the another celestial body. So that's the etymological meaning of graha. So even stars can be grahas in that sense and things like that. They will be called Tara Graha. So the issue was that at the time of Brahmagupta, this was still in transition. I don't think Brahmagupta is talking about Ketu. He is talking of Rahu. All that he is saying is, after giving the computation of this, he criticizes all those people who denounce the Puranas by saying they are meaningless. That Rahu is actually along the shadow, and it is that which is obstructing. So he is giving a what can be called an apologetics for the Puranas. And it's criticizing people who are trying to criticize Puranas, kind of. I think that is the. But what has happened is that one has become something called scientific, another thing has become something called superstition. If you properly understand, there is nothing more scientific about the one or more superstition about the one. They are different kind of models one is talking about. So from a particular time to another time, this understanding has moved into a particular manner. So we have to, by word Ketu, it was a comet even in Arabic. In fact, Nagibayar has written a paper on a comet called Al-Qaid in Islamic astronomy in 7th or 8th century. So this is the position. But since we have stopped, earlier books were not writing history of astronomy per se. They were explaining, a book written in 18th century in India would have referred to all those things which are in relation to what is written in that book. But today we are in the business of trying to explore that. So then we have to know the complete sort of evolution of the term, and even how others have understood or misunderstood this. So Al-Biruni's view was that all Indian science is a mix of pearl and dung heap. That's what he says. Now, first of all, he is entitled to his view, but actually Al-Biruni had a lot of problem in trying to understand. So he has written, say, on Sanskrit meter. And there was nothing like this kind of chandas in Arabic. So he says, it's all very obscure to me, still I will tell you something. So now from that you can make out something about what is there in chandas, but it will not be correspond to what is written in our Pingala or Vritaratnakara. So you have to understand that this was an attempt to see what it is. So he has written a translation of Yoga Sutras that has now been published, Al-Biruni's translation. He claimed he knew Sanskrit, but many modern Western scholars like Pingiri, etc., think he didn't know much of Sanskrit. And he has this understanding that Indians lack, what Professor Narasimha is saying, that the Greek method of mathematics that postulates to derivations. So they are not doing. In fact, whenever mathematics issues came, the main claim, especially in 17th, 18th, 19th, 20th century has been, oh, they knew this, but do they know the derivation of this? Is the kind of question which is repeatedly asked. As if the derivation is something which is more, because the derivation is to establish its truth for all times. So mathematics is for all times. Hardy says that in his Apology of a Mathematician, he was an atheist. So he said the only thing eternal that I can do is to discover a theorem, and that will stay forever. Or what. So this is the kind of understanding with which they place the demonstration to be above the result. The result is valid in all known cases. Of course, doesn't prove that it is valid for all the times. But even a mathematical proof, it is conditional on your assumptions, conditional on the way you have formulated it. And so many things that were seen to have been pakka and proved were not proved. The Euclid's book is supposed to be so perfect. But in 14th, 15th, 16th century, they started discovering hundreds of problems with it. The very first construction of Euclid, which is perpendicular bisection of a bit of a line. So you take a compass and cut two arcs both sides and then join that. That's a perpendicular bisector. This is called the what is called the Matsya Vidhi in the Shulba Sutras of India, in trying to find out from east-west line to find out the north-south line, or the north-south line, the east-west line. So this does not follow from Euclid's axiom, because you have to have something called an axiom of continuity, that these two curves will intersect. So like that, then people found that all congruence theorems assume that you take this angle, take it and put it and above on the other. So how can this be a proof? So you have to have displacement axioms. So like this, so since Euclid is dealing with the plane geometry, which is more or less a simple thing of triangles and circles and things like that. So by about 1900, Hilbert could come up with a book called Grundlagen and der Geometry, which is sort of puts in all necessary axioms and all definitions and make. So something that was thought of Pakka in their own ideal in 300 BCE is Pakka only in 2300 years later. But they have lived all these 2300 years thinking that they have a very extraordinarily way of finally proving something and write QED below and things like that. So this is what Al-Biruni says. These people do not have this idea. So when I showed them some demonstrations, they were puzzled and all that. They started asking me how and this and that. So those kinds of things. So when different, after all, these sciences are not continuously developing in relation to each other. And they get something from one, they get something from the other. Al-Biruni would have learned a lot of things from India. We would have learned something from him also. But they are incommunicable, as Thomas Kuhn says, between different paradigms. You have to know much more to be able to communicate one to the other. Just otherwise they will not make sense in one paradigm as in other way. So the Brahmagupta Aryabhata controversy was of that kind. They belong to different pakshas. Yes, ma'am.
So all your discussions still, I understand it. There are similarities. Uddesha, Lakshana, Vibhaga, and Pariksha seem similar.
Yes, madam. Desha.
Uddesha, Lakshana,
Okay.
They seem similar. They both are the same. And then, but what seems to be different is the Tattva, Shastra, and Vyavahara aspects between West, how Indians viewed science here, Western. So the Tattva is like universal principle, but it has to be interpreted in the Vyavahara and everywhere. So I was wondering if you can comment. So this is all coming back to the question, right? When did we miss how did we miss the bus? Somewhere. I'm wondering.
That's an important question. How did we miss the bus is an important question. But about the first thing, you see, Uddesha, Lakshana, Pariksha is useful in what is called ontology or metaphysics, or that you put all the categories of the world and then give the definitions of them and see that that definition is valid in practice, in as and when issues arise. Does it really? You have to refine this, you have to refine this, etc. Otherwise, you have this Anubandha Chatushtaya, which is sort of what is the prayojana, what is the purpose, who is the adhikari, and what is. So these are there. But most crucially, what vis-a-vis the West, what is missing is the emphasis on that we have a theory that is comprehensive and universal. And then the purpose of the Shastra is to improve this theory.
Tattva and Shastra.
It is to improve this theory. That emphasis is not there. You have a methodology by which we can understand the world and perform all our actions. And from that we know something about the world also. But the world is not something that is within our confines that we can say 100% that forever we have understood this aspect of this in thoroughness, or this is how it's going to be for all time, sir. So that is, but we are confident that for our practical purposes, the methodologies that we have discussed give us the reasonably good result. And we will be very happy if another methodology is discovered, maybe on a slightly different principle also, which give us better results. So, quest for science is not for better theory, the quest for science is for better applications and increase the domain of applications. So, in that sense, whatever modern Western science has discovered can be just taken as application. Now, whether you have to buy the theory that we have discovered the laws, eternal laws by which God has created the universe. So, there is no reason for you to take that theory aspect of it. That we have some theory, and from that we have some applications, and these applications and this theory have, but the goal all the time is to find better applications and not just keep on putting our theory to test that a Bell's experiment this proves quantum mechanics as against classical mechanics, and so thousands of tests are there. That is not the goal of science in India. If somebody believed that Earth is rotating daily, or somebody believed that the celestial sphere is rotating, so both these went through. Aryabhatta says in his book very clearly that it's the Earth which is rotating, and Aryabhatta also says in his book that somebody traveling in a boat will see the banks as receding. Anuloma gatihi naustha pashyati achalam something. So in the same way this guy, so this is what is called principle of relative motion, not Galilean principle of relativity as Roddam Narasimha says in his this thing. But each motion depends on the frame of reference in which you are in. Only that was one of the general principles he puts very few general principles. This is one of the general principles he put in his 108 verses. So this was of course debated by others. They gave various arguments that this is not valid. They were more physical arguments. But as far as understanding celestial motion, whether it's Earth which is rotating or stars which is rotating, you are calculating the same things ultimately. And therefore it doesn't matter for the science of astronomy as it was developed at that period. Of course there were physical arguments that you drop something or a bird starts from a tree, why does it flow back to the same? All these kinds of questions are there, which were discussed in Greek science also, Arabic science also, Indian science also. People discuss these kinds of things. But there was no, in fact this most crucial thing, whether all planets go around the Earth or all planets go around the Sun. This was thought of as a philosophical issue, whether Sun is at the center of the universe or Earth is at the center of the universe. You don't see such a discussion in Indian philosophy, Indian books at all. Of course they start with the hypothesis that everything is going around the Earth. Ultimately you want to calculate, as seen from the Earth, what are the coordinates of a celestial body is going to be. That's what you have to calculate. So that they are very clear. Now when Nilakantha comes up with an understanding that all planets do not go around the Earth, he is coming up with an observational statement of their motion. That with this, the fact that Mercury and Venus, they orbits, or Earth doesn't lie within their orbit, and their orbit is around a certain celestial point which is close to the Sun, called the mean Sun. So this is how he argues. He is not arguing that, even Copernicus argued that making Sun the center simplifies the theory. That's what he was. So this principle is called Occam's razor in Western philosophy. It's generally called Laghava in Indian texts. So I'm sorry, I lost the track of the question you had.
The question was the difference is there is a tattva.
So the difference is the fact that you know that the theories are transitory and keep changing, but they are useful because their consequences are applications which are efficacious. But you have all the time you keep observing and improving, and they're improving not with the idea of improving the theory, but improving your applications. In that the theory might change also, and we know all the time that the theory. Whereas I think in the West that there's a certain regularity that the universe is, and it's our duty to discover it, and that discovering it will give us great power about over the universe. And so we have to go from a theory to a more sounder theory and a better theory and all that. So that is an enterprise which got sort of made more sophisticated only in 20th century. So in the entire development from the Greek times. So they had, as I told you, they had a very elementary theory that celestial bodies is where all laws are applicable and terrestrial motion had. And then modern science, when it came, they had this understanding. We had discovered the ultimate laws and things like that. Laplace discovered that ultimately you find a way in which you can give the initial conditions of all particles that constitute the universe. We can sort of predict the entire course of the universe. So if you have a big data center and have gigabytes of data and give all this data, it can churn out that, at least in approximation, if not exactly. So that sort of thing is no longer. They say each theory is the best approximation to the reality. So there is a reality and there is a theory, but they are different now. So they were not different earlier. Earlier the theory was supposed to be the reality. In India, the theory is never reality. This is the only philosophical point. But that changes your framework, that changes what you look at, that changes the way you go about. So, and that changes the way you allow different theories to function. And so all this, it changes. And so that is the, now bus being missed is a different kind of a situation. As I will explain in the afternoon, our sciences and technologies were not considered backward in late 18th century by Europeans who were at the, of course they thought that they had much better mathematics and much better astronomy at that time, but otherwise, but even in that they were surprised to see that our calculations of eclipses were good enough with respect to the kind of calculations they could do. And be it in steel making, or be it in agriculture, or be it in irrigation, or be it in medicine, be it, so everywhere sort of it was. And often they would say these people don't know the principles, but they are doing this. Their methods are crude, but they are getting very good material. So this how, so a village blacksmith could fashion very good wrought iron, or people could produce very high quality iron or steel and things like that in a small furnace. So all this was surprising, very interesting. Now, after that, the development of science, technology, knowledge in India has been somewhat checkered. And so that has to recover. We have to recover to a point where we neither know the tradition on which we are working. So what is happening? Half the time, the center of activity of it lies outside of India. And even if you do the best of work, therefore, the best of work will come only in some footnote. And it may not matter much for the progress of that discipline. Unless you sit in the center and participate in it, you are. Another is the motivation for doing all this has ceased to be the reality of India, the needs of India, the environment of India, the purposes for which these need to be done. So if you can correct these two, so how do you bring center of gravity here? You have to do that kind of science where you think you have an advantage, where you think you have data, where you think you have ideas, where you or it's something that you need to know for today. Similarly, you have to find applications where you think there is a necessity. So which is the problem that scientific communities have to do, technological community. So in the post-colonial era, even today we do not have the kind of community formation where what is done in IIT Madras, IIT Delhi may not be known to people in JNU. They may not be known to the people in Delhi University, or even in Aligarh or Lucknow. And there are no forums, bodies where we meet and discuss what should be done, how it should be done. There are various mechanisms, but we have this thing at the back of our mind that modern Western science is universal. Now, universal in the sense that it can be checked anywhere. In that sense, all Indian science that we did till 18th century, or even whatever we are doing, is universal. But that we could also do a different universal science than what is going on, with a different focus, with different flavor, with different applications. And there, whatever we did earlier can have great consequence. They have great value, if only we knew about them. So we have neglected all aspects of this under some wrong philosophical understanding of science and technology. And Professor Narasimha's work clarifies many aspects of it, and he repeatedly says that why are we not studying this? Why are we? I mean, this was extraordinary science till 16th, 17th, 18th century. So many fantastic things. And of course, he adds these things that it was rational and things like that. Those are somewhat complicated issues. We should understand what is rational and things like that. Maybe some other discussion today, if it will take us a little bit away. So, what has happened, not just in science and technology, in all spheres of knowledge in India, is that we have to first recover this knowledge. Now, recovering this knowledge is not a matter for 2000 years or 500 years or 200 years. It's a matter of one generation that we determined to do this, it will be done. The West went around the world to discover all the knowledge that it could get and refashion it to their frameworks and their ideals and their philosophies and their purposes in a course of 150 years. It will happen here. Now, of course, the world is in the better communication today. But better communication need not mean that all the time we have to talk between Delhi and New York. Better communication can be, we can talk all around amongst ourselves also, in different languages in India also. So this is a enterprise where we have even not set up the mechanisms. When C.V. Raman started the journal Current Science, when the Indian Academy of Sciences was constituted in 1930s. So in the first issue, he writes an editorial. He says that, of course, the products of science is universal. But their discovery, their use and their dissemination is what they take a nation's scientific activity forward. So if we don't publish our own things here and discuss these things here and move on with that, we will be all the time caught in the peer group system of the entire world. And it's not entire world, it is some center which is publishing that journal sitting somewhere. So this principle, which was known to us at the time of our independence movement in 1935, we have not even put it into effect even today in 2025. Most Indian scientists do not take any pride in publishing in Indian journals. And they have legitimate grievance against most of those journals. But it's not that they're extremely happy about the journals where they are being published. They are very sad, very depressed when even their best articles are not given the due status. Things won't get published in Physical Review letters, but they will say, you can publish this in Physical Review E. Or they will not publish it in the latest review journal or Nature or Science. So, this is one simple instance I am saying, and the umpteen meetings held in DST, INSA, everywhere, what should be done. But the background principle is that India should be the center of our scientific activity. So all this should be written in our journals, it should be discussed in our languages, it should be taught to our students. And this includes the scientific heritage of India also in a big way, which we have put it in some closets, if there are closets to put it. So all these things have slowed down the recovery of scientific, technological and progress in knowledge in India. So, I mean, we can call this decolonization. I mean, those are only terms till we don't understand the details of the mechanisms by which, I mean, we have nothing against the Britishers doing their science now. What is our problem? So, we have to look at everything that's going on in the world, but with our national goals and ways of doing things. And this is also a cultural region. This is not just different. So there has been, till about 200 years ago, the outcomes and writings of science were very distinct, in China, in India, in West Asia, in Europe. So after that, these other countries have undergone an eclipse. Now a lot of countries are recovering from that, and a lot of countries are doing extraordinary things. India has also done great things. But the outcome is not proportional to the effort that we have put or the amount of worry that we have, that somehow we have not reached the level we should. And that involves some serious rethinking, and knowing about how we have reached this position is very important. What was our position for the 1000, 2000, 3000 years when our civilization was a leader in knowledge also? And what made this go down? Not only the historical causes by which we had defeats in wars, and not just, but in knowledge why, and how this was changed, and what we should study, what we should do research on, how a certain framework is given in which we are operating. So that we have to understand, and what effect it had on India's health, economic health, social health, intellectual health. And for us to have a resurgence, we should stop worrying about where India was wrong, where India was right. That is not the thing. We should know what India was, how things got changed, and what are all the inputs that can take us now forward in today's world. I mean, that is the simplest way of thinking about it.
So I have two questions.
Yes, sir.
One is logical
Ah.
and related to Indian logic and
Yes.
mathematics, but
Huh?
one is related to Indian logic and mathematics, but I will pose it tomorrow because I need to process it more. Another question was philosophical. Given that Indians didn't worry about universalization of theory and other things that Greek had, how did we not fall into the philosophical trap of relativism or nihilism?
We did not believe in universalization of human knowledge because we understood knowledge is human knowledge. And so even divine revelations are received by humans, and then they become a human product, and others have to understand it as a thing recited by somebody for them. So the success of Greek mathematics and logic and philosophy in a Greek society which was dominated by only 10% or 5% of the population being citizens, and the rest were at their beck and call. So all the practical activity was done outside of their cities by mining, agriculture, everything. So this was the even war. These were the leaders. So how could this be the model of knowledge in a big flourishing society like India? We had, of course, very small villages which were centers of knowledge, but they were in a sense more practical about knowledge. That's the reason why this bug didn't catch us. I mean, it's not that there will be several Indians who would have talked of universalization or whatever they have. So it is this realization, and so it will come from the Upanishads to everywhere. I mean, so the Upanishad will say that the most things cannot be explained by yato vacho nivartante aprapya manasasa. The ultimate. So the two things that try to understand the ultimate reality of universe and the purpose of human life, etc. That is a quest to which this other way of living in the world, in a way that gives the least amount of problem either to the others or to the world around us. So to be able to successfully live in the world, we have to have as much information on the world. So our observation is as much important as our theory, and our applications are as much important as our beliefs. So that is the focus by which we go in this. And the other attitude is a certain attitude of a certain elite of some societies, which is called hubris. It is that you have discovered something now. Today it appears to you it covers everything, and today I have this power over everything. We knew that all these are transitory, and so there are individuals who get caught with this. But as a society, as a knowledge system, we never sort of. So nihilism is the other extreme, that there is no knowledge. There is no such thing. I mean, Without knowledge, you don't live. All living activity requires sophisticated learning. The humans are different from rest of creation in that they have to observe and know and put their mind, put their discrimination on how best to know and live. Others have a natural way of evolving. The rest of creation have it. So that would be the thing. And that humans are endowed with some extraordinary power called rationality. And that gives them the sort of justification, or whatever you may call, to manipulate and control and do with others. Or at least they are other species or other humans or other sections of humans are who lack, children lack rationality, or women lack rationality, animals lack rationality. This is all you hear that. And what is this rationality? Rationality is the trivial part of scientific activity, that once you know certain principles, what are the consequence of those principles is what is coming out of reason. Now those principles should be true or false, will control whether your consequences are correctly stated. So you believe your principles are universal and you act according to it, is acting rationally, is not the so in India this part of logic, deductive logic, is not given great importance. If you want to look for deductive logic in Indian books, this is a more simpler logic. Now this will be useful in going from some things that is already known to some other things in simpler situations. But in more complicated situations, it's much more observation and determination from observation which will lead you to new knowledge, not this deductive process from. So there is no reason as a faculty of humans in Indian texts. I mean, this is what philosophers say, not much of that. So we have this pratyaksha, which is observation. We have this anumana. This anumana, the word itself, that which follows. So the anumana is something that by repeated observation you have a general conclusion, which you apply in a particular case and come to a conclusion, is called anumana. So you see, I mean, the standard example, you see smoke somewhere and then you infer that there is fire. So that is happening because by whole lot of observation you know where there is smoke, there is fire. And then you see smoke here and you conclude therefore there should be fire. So but then there will be huge discussion on how justified you are and all this. So this is not reason. So reason would be from few postulate and from ordinary rules of inference, generating new this thing. So that kind of idea of rationality as a characteristic of human being is the Greek thing associated with their philosophy, their mathematics, their understanding of the truth of the universe. And that they have called eternal unchanging. We have called eternal unchanging to be that experience of the universe where you somehow understand it by your yogic practice or whatever you are. So, but that you don't bring it back to the world and say, therefore I can tell you what will happen to this cup or what will happen to. So, those are different things, that what is eternally true in our beliefs are of a different kind than the whatever are the truths of material well-being in the world. So that will be, those are very necessary. In fact, the Greeks went into a nihilism on the terrestrial phenomena by this belief in, that's what the Dark Ages of Europe was about in some sense. So there is no nihilism of that kind in India, which was, we were always a curious and civilization, always looking for new knowledge. And
so another question, somewhat similar. In European Dark Ages, East, particularly India and China, were ahead in science. But
no, the Islamic civilization was also particularly ahead.
basically Eastern, Asian area, we can say. in general. But post Renaissance in Europe, scientific progress was tremendous. But the one question that it raised in my mind is, what is the role of cultural philosophy in all of this? Because see, Professor Narasimha mentioned that history of science is checkered, but at the end he concluded it with the role of epistemology in it. And Francis Bacon played a huge role in the same for Europe. And somewhat around 19th century, in the previous century, Raja Ram Mohan Roy did something similar as Francis Bacon for India when he looked upon Europe and said India should look there, learn from there and improve. But it didn't work in case of Raja Ram Mohan Roy for India. So, and also one
No,
more thing.
before you go further, can we discuss this point?
Yeah.
There's really no similarity between Francis Bacon and Rajaram Mohan Rai. Francis Bacon is criticizing the Greeks, saying that their ideas are limited. They are mostly words, meaning propositions and their conclusions. They tell you nothing about the world. And we have to look at the world and you have to make inferences from the world. So we have to have a more general logic than the deductive logic of the Greeks and not confined to geometric ways of thinking. So his criticism of the Greeks is specific, that the Greeks were looking for theory, but they didn't have enough inputs for their theory. We should have enough inputs from which we make better theories, because new phenomena were being studied and new theories were coming up. What Rajaram Mohan Rai is saying is the entire Indian corpus of knowledge is like Greek knowledge, that it's of no practical utility. And demonstration for that is that look, our civilization has been conquered and we are at this kind of a position. Because 60, 70 years of conquest had somehow convinced him that there is really no useful knowledge in the entire Indian corpus. So that's a very different thing than. So with that assumption, obviously you couldn't have moved too much forward. I mean, so what Rajaram Mohan Rai rescued was, he thought that the high principles of Upanishads and Vedanta were the main thing that we need to stand by. The rest of our corpus we can forego. That was a consequence of a period where it was actually the height of our depression in the conquest. That 1760 Bengal is taken over. And 1770 you have this phenomenon where about a third of the population has perished, and then the whole history that follows. In 1820s, it does appear to him that these professors in Sanskrit college are discussing that what is the meaning of this word, can it be derived from this root or another root? How does it matter? Does it give us any practical utility? Does it give us some mineral? Does it give us some commerce? Does it give us? So that was the kind of question he was worried about. And so the two peculiar things he did. He wanted us to be taught in English and taught by Europeans all new knowledge, Baconian knowledge. Because this Bacon has been hailed as the philosopher of the greatness of Europe was due to Bacon, according to them, that he discovered the new method. In fact, there are people who have criticized. I will send you a paper to him, we can circulate. What Bacon discovered was nothing new in terms of scientific reasoning. This was all known to all other civilizations, which were, especially the Chinese, who had done that amount of mechanical contrivances and all that. And in India also, where so many theories and applications were there.